Thank you so much for having me here, my good friends at Art Blocks and OpenSea and InterAccess Media Arts Centre, for this Redux presentation. It's always a pleasure being with this group of digital artists. And as I was saying in the warm-up, I feel like a lot of us know each other pretty well at this point. This all came about because Art Blocks asked me to do a workshop at their annual weekend retreat. And they said, well, you know, maybe you could do like a generative art workshop. And I said, hell no. Because there's no way I'm gonna stand in front of a bunch of generative artists and pretend that I can teach them how to code. I don't fly to different countries to look like a total tool like that, all right? No, you're not gonna get me on that. So I thought, well, instead of doing a technical workshop, you know, there are not a lot of people who do workshops on how they think and how they conceptualize their art practice. And, you know, I don't know, maybe it's because a lot of artists want their intellectual process to be mysterious and they want, you know, mystique. But personally, I don't care. So, and I think that if you have clarity of thought as to why you are doing something and what your conceptual aims are, then it behooves you to talk about it. I think that is a good and cool thing to do. And I think that this is an important time to do this. This is the most crucial time because, and I think a lot of people in this room can relate to this, it was kind of a whirlwind 4 years. We did a lot of shit. We did a lot of shit. And that was cool and good, and that was the right time to do a bunch of shit. We did shit faster than we could process what the hell we were doing, and that was good, and that was the right move. And that's what you're supposed to do when there's that energy in the air. But now, I think we're at this moment where, after a brief repose, you know, we feel like some of that energy is coming back. And this is probably a good time to take inventory of the lessons learned over the past 4 years so that we can, as we approach our next busy period, move with intention and clarity of thought. So this is a talk about how I've taken stock and developed a perspective on all that stuff that happened in the past 4 years. And I'll draw a little bit on historical examples and a little bit from books, which I'll share on these slides. And my references here are based on my assertion that what has been going on here does have some historical precedent, and we can learn from that. And we need to have a strong mental model for what we've been doing for the past 4 years in order to build something new in the next 4. So, as the kids say, let's fucking go. Okay, part 1. Art must be about something, okay? Let's take it as a priori that an artwork needs to be about something. Now, maybe this is an obvious statement to make, but maybe it's not. So just in case it's not, I will give a couple of reasons why I believe that this is true. Artwork needs to be about something. More specifically, I think that a good artwork needs to be about more than one thing, like at least 2 things. And I think that the greatest amount of distance that you can make a viewer travel between those 2 things that an artwork may be about, while still maintaining credibility, that is to say, while never being specious or hyperbolic or dubious, that distance between the ideas in your art is, for me, a reasonable indicator of whether you're looking at a good artwork. So let's look at a couple of examples, okay? On the left, not art. On the right, art. On the left, a nicely crafted image, certainly, but not art. This is an ad for Del Monte food products. So what is this artwork about? Well, this is a picture about how Del Monte food is tasty and fresh and available for purchase. And that's about it. I cross-reference this impression of what I think the art is about with what I know about the conditions under which this artwork was made and the intentions with which this artwork was made. And I reckon, okay, this was created to be an advertisement to encourage me to purchase food products. And so, okay, my interpretation feels pretty much correct. Okay? On the right, art. Now, this is another image of food. This is a Caravaggio, painted somewhere around 1600. It's not his best painting. Doesn't have any of his signature volumetric light, God rays coming down. But, you know, it's still a good painting, man. It's Caravaggio. You're not going to get mad at it. And so we can learn something here. This is, of course, also an image about food, and yet we look closer. The leaves are wilting. The pear is rotting. And it looks like an insect has been chewing through this apple. And we realize this is not a painting about fruit at all. This is a painting about rotting and decay. I cross-reference this impression that I have from the image with what I know about the conditions of its creation, what I know about the author, Caravaggio, Catholicism's greatest sinner, and the specific time and place in which he is creating this painting. And I consider that perhaps this painting is not just about the decay of the fruit, but about his own personal decay, or the decay of the Catholic Church itself. And now, I've traveled a long distance between the things that this picture may plausibly and credulously be about. Food, the decay of the church. Okay, let's do another one, and let's switch to a topic different than food because I'm hungry. Lunch atop a skyscraper. An iconic image, truly one of the most famous images in American history. A cultural shelling point, we could say. In fact, if Lindy Knowledge and Power Laws made a sex tape together, it would look like this. That's how famous this image is. Anyway, what is this picture about? I guess it's about how skyscrapers are dizzyingly tall, and this photo does a really good job of communicating how tall a skyscraper are. I guess you can also see these iron workers being completely undaunted and fearless. And it's about how the noble construction workers are undaunted and fearless. And, I learned a little bit about, the intention with which this image was made. All right, this was staged as a publicity stunt to promote the then under construction RCA Tower at Rockefeller Center. There were other sessions from this photo session. There were other snapshots where they were pretending to be napping, stuff like that. It's kind of like it's propaganda. So knowing that, my understanding of what this picture is about pretty much checks out. You're supposed to go, ooh, ah, and that's about it. Now, I took this other image that also prominently features some I-beams. But instead of these I-beams holding up a bunch of men are holding up these I-beams. All right, and something's afoot, man. This smells like art to me. All right, that's a real man bites dog situation there. So what is this image about? Well, the men are holding up the I-beams on their shoulders, but this isn't a construction site. These I-beams aren't going to be used for anything like in the other picture. So I guess this is a picture about these workers being kind of useless. And they don't look like they're having a good time, like in the other picture. I learn about the intention with which this artwork was made. This is an artwork by Santiago Sierra. And in this artwork, like in many of Santiago Sierra's artworks, random people are paid minimum wage to do menial or degrading work. And the performance of this work and the way that they are paid is the art. So in this case, the work is simply to hold up these I-beams in a vaguely art-like formation. So knowing that, I realized that, artwork is kind of about the artist being kind of an asshole. And I didn't see that coming. And actually, speaking of artists being assholes, I look at the formation of these I-beams being held up, and it kind of is vaguely evocative of a certain type of art. Anybody take a stab? Does that look like anything to you? I'll give you a hint. There's a reason I chose this specific image to show here in Marfa, Texas. Right? I mean, it kind of looks like a Donald Judd sculpture, right? And so I was like, oh my God, is this artwork like really about modern art being simply a mechanism that dehumanizes human beings? Good Lord, I didn't see that coming. And so you see the distance that I've traveled between the different things that this artwork could be about is a great distance indeed. And I think that that makes it a good artwork. I do these mental gymnastics as I process all the things that an artwork could be about. And that's pleasurable for me. And that's why I say that, art needs to be about something, probably two things, make a distance between the two things. I've shown two images on each slide. One image gives me easy answers. The other image brings me on a journey. There are other more pragmatic reasons for asserting that art needs to be about something. And this is an institutionalist argument. One of the things that we've learned over the past 4 years, and this was surprising to some, is that a lot of the artists and collectors in this space actually do care about the broader art world, and they want to participate in it. And over the past 4 years, we've seen a ton of people, a lot of them associated with the generative art practice, a lot of them associated with art blocks in particular, rightfully proud of their inclusion in exhibitions around the world and museum collections. And if you also care about this, then even a cursory understanding of how the institutional art world operates will tell you that being about something is what gives an artwork utility in an institutional art setting. In the context of the broader art world, and I mean, we can also just say in the context of like societal function in general, individual artworks are like Lego pieces of meaning that others, most often curators, put together to construct opinionated statements about the world. Or maybe you can think of individual artworks more like those little magnetic poetry pieces that might be on your fridge. No one piece on its own needs to contain a full thesis on a subject as broad as the nature of humankind, but each artwork must, at the very least, point to one idea or concept that can be useful in constructing such a thesis. So here's an example. I'll go back to our friend Santiago Sierra, and now I place this artwork within the context of other historical paintings. All right, check, this is my primo curation. This is my primo Google Slides curation platform. 3 images of labor spanning 150 years. Over on the left, in 1849, Courbet shows us labor as the extraction of materials from the earth. It is lonely and grueling. In the middle, Jacob Lawrence in 1947 shows us labor as a process of building stuff. It is additive and productive. Work is dynamic. Just look at the colors, and collaborative. And now a picture of labor in the year 2001. Labor is useless and futile actions in which people do menial tasks with no purpose beyond the amusement of the better off. Look at how long this mental journey has become, right? And this art working together, all these artworks are wonderful on their own, but in my estimation, they're better now. They all had meaning independently, but put together, I get an opinion. Not a statement of fact, just a short, opinionated, and stylish story about a slice of history. In previous slides, I explained why I like specific artworks, and this slide shows why I like art in general, like as a thing that humans do, as a hobby. But that's just like my opinion, man. And so look, in this institutional theory of art, you can easily opt out of it. More power to you if you do. But I think that art's function inside the art world can also be thought of as sort of a short form to talk about its function in the world in general. And I think that being about something is what gives an artwork utility in society at large and in the broader arc of history. Now, a counterpoint, and an invitation for you, the patient audience, to disregard everything that I've just said. Because there actually is a way to get very rich just counter-trading everything that I say. All right? That's always an option. Okay? Doing the opposite of what I say is always an option. So here's one simple trick for making art. You can ignore all this, everything I said about making art about stuff. You can leave this talk now, and you can create the most meaningless, empty, and vacuous art possible. Then all you got to do is you got to just wait for the space to be at its frothiest. Then you release the artwork, and then you wait for people to say that it's about freedom to transact or a bold new future or whatever. And this absolutely works. But that it works, it also kind of proves my point about how art needs to be about something. Because if you make art sufficiently about nothing, and I mean so, you can't half-ass this. It's got to be so about nothing that it makes an episode of Seinfeld look like Gravity's Rainbow, all right? And you give people enough reason to care, and markets are great for giving people a reason to care, they will flood their own meaning into your artwork, right? They will make it about whatever they want. But in doing so, I think they just prove how much they need an artwork to be about something. There's problems with this. One is you have no real control over those conditions. But look, this worked, in this period of history that we're talking about. It worked in 2021 and 2022. And it kind of stopped working in 2023. But it might start working again. This guy might start working again if the conditions are right. Okay, so we've established that art must be about something. So now we're going to ask a question. Let's bring it home. Let's bring it back to what we're doing. What are some digital artworks about? All right? Or to be more specific, what is generative artwork about? Well, each one's differently, but let's create a general model that we can use, general model that we can apply. And we'll say, actually, what is this very specific flavor of generative art? The flavor of generative art that I think really exploded along with the Art Blocks platform in 2021 and 2022, and that has seen this broad expansion of interest. What's that all about? I have an answer, something that I believe personally, but it took me a while to get there. And so first, I want to talk about why it is so difficult to answer this question. Why is it so difficult to answer the question, what is this about, especially when it comes to technological art? Technological art faces a unique challenge that other kinds of art don't face. It is really, really hard for a digital artwork, and especially technologically innovative artwork, to be about something, or to communicate that it is about something, for one simple reason. Technological art struggles to be about something else because technology itself dominates every other idea in the artwork. Technology casts a pervasive and imposing shadow over the artwork. Technology is shiny, and it is new, and it is distracting. And all of you probably know this to be true. It's let me ask you, whether you are an artist or a collector, do you talk about your digital art with your normie friends or with your family at Thanksgiving? And if you do, honestly, what percentage of that conversation is devoted to explaining what the heck is an NFT, right? Right? So then think about how much time you get to spend talking about the content of the artwork, what it actually means, versus the time you had to spend talking about the technological substrate that it's built on. So you see, when the technology is new or flashy, it overshadows all other ideas, all other subject matter in the work. And a good artist recognizes this. So to quote George Saunders, a great artist takes responsibility. A great artist understands exactly the effects of all the materials that they bring to bear in their artwork. But instead of standing here and theorizing, let me show you an example of what I mean. Okay, so we're going to show you an artist who doesn't understand this. We'll look at this is what you're here for. We're going to look at some mediocre, try-hard bullshit, and we're going to tear it apart. We're going to rip some stuff to shreds. So, we're going to look at some art by Mitchell F. Chan. And in particular, so this is my work from school. This is my work from when I was doing a Master's of Fine Art at the School of Art Institute of Chicago, right? This is like my graduate thesis project. And I'm here, I'm a new media artist. I'm a clever boy. Look at how clever I am. God damn, you see those things spin? Those things spin, and then they push the things, and then look, they push the things. Look at this coming, man. It's so good, right? But it's just like, this was the problem, all right? I believed I was trying to say something, trying to make an artwork that was about something. And I believed that because, I had a vague idea that art had to be about something. But the truth is, there's just so much technology here. And nothing I was saying was ever going to compete with this. Man, someday I'll tell you how I did that. I was real clever, right? And so even, like, this is where, I sort of got it to, by the time I was done, that fancy Masters of Fine Art degree. And look, man, there's like this real idea here. See, the clouds, they spell out like they're like a dot matrix printer, right? And they're spelling out the book Don Quixote. So it was like, about this like illegible text and like, impossibility of communication, yada, yada, yada. And look, man, honestly, not a bad idea. Not a bad idea. But nobody was ever going to see it, right? Even in this pared down version, there's all this tech here, and even look at how I documented it. Like I really show off how clever I was. I got these speaker cones and stuff like that. Nobody was ever going to see past the technology, right? To see what I was trying to say, like literally or like on a deeper level. And to be honest, like deep down, I think at that point in my career, like at that level of maturity, I probably wanted that. I put all that tech front and center because, honestly, I was really proud of figuring that stuff out. And, I was a student at the time, and I just wanted people to see how clever I was. And like being clever about my technical chops was, an easy thing to feel confident in. It's a lot easier to feel confident in that than in about the validity and depth of what you're trying to say, right? But, I think even if you eventually escape that insecurity, right, with like years of experience, even if you're not trying to hide behind your tech, right, you're still going to have the same problem, right? It's hard to see what some of these tech art pieces are about because I get too distracted by the gadgetness of it all. So that's the bad news. Now, here's the good news. There are a couple of solutions to this. The solutions unfold in multiple stages and sequentially, but you have to go through them in order to arrive at the ultimate solution. Solution one, and this is the best solution, is that eventually the technology becomes invisible. The medium becomes invisible. This happens naturally over time. Here's an example. On the left, what year is this? The Lumiere brothers, 1896, The Arrival of a Train. So you've probably heard this story. It's quite probably apocryphal. But apparently in 1896, people go into the theater and they see this film of a train coming towards them, and they freak out. They run out of the theater. They think a real train is coming and gonna run over them all, murder them all. So that technological innovation was distracting, to say the least. I think you were probably in the year 1896 not going to be able to use the technology of cinematography to tell a touching coming-of-age story. Okay, not when people are running out of the theater, worried that that they're going to be murdered in their seat. But just 7 years later, you get The Great Train Robbery It's okay. It's a real movie. There's a plot. There are characters. There's a story being told. And at this point, right, this becomes possible because the technology in just 7 short years became widely understood to the point of being invisible. It became normalized. And this thing that happens with technology inevitably, this is the best solution. It's the ultimate solution. When you get to the point that the technology is invisible, then you can do anything. You can actually fully exploit all the potential of your medium, and you can tell any kind of story that you want. You can tell the kind of stories that are only possible through your medium. And that's the part that I cannot wait for when I make art in any digital medium. It happened with cinema and photography and video games. It's going to happen in AI, right? So you'll just look at AI images and you won't care that it's made with AI. It'll just have to be a good image or a bad image, and it'll have to be about something or not be about something. And if it's about more than one thing and there's a big distance between those things, it'll be good art. And nobody will really care if it was made in Midjourney Model 17 or DALL-E Model 432, right? And I hope that this also is going to happen in like computer systems-based work. I hope. But I think that we're not quite there yet. We're just not quite there yet. And you're still going to be explaining Bitcoin and NFTs at your Christmas dinner next week. No medium really gets a direct route to this point of global understanding and normalization. They always have to travel through the solutions that I'm going to talk about next. But as a brief interlude, let's go back to my mediocre grad school work, just because I want to show you how I put my thumb on the scale a little bit to try to get to this solution, right, when I started to understand this. This was a final form that particular, like, our artwork took, right? This was 5 years after I graduated art school. I finally made this. And this was probably my first good artwork. This is literally the first artwork I made that I think was actually good. And I mean, so first of all, it took me 5 years, like, after I spent like 2 years being in art school. And like the key was that I just hid everything. Like I just hid everything. I didn't want anybody to ever know that there was like technology there. And once I hid everything, then it could just become a statement, right? Then it can just become a statement about these like barely like tangible like entities that are able to perform a violence on each other. And I liked this. And that was me coming to grips with the fact that, like, yeah, I couldn't show off how clever I was technologically and still say something. And that was a good thing to learn. And it took me a long time. It was the first time I had the courage to make my innovation invisible and to give the viewer space. So, all right. I said so that's a way to put the thumb on the scale, right, to make the technology invisible, so you can just be telling stories. All right, there are other solutions before you get to an invisible technology. Solution number 2 is really easy, and it's awesome because like we're kind of there. Solution 2 is like you can just be a subculture, and it's awesome. Like it's super fun. It like kind of rules. I know this is like not what a lot of people want to hear, but we have to say it. Like, you can decide that it's totally fine for your actual message as an artist to be legible only to a somewhat narrow audience with a specialized way of seeing or a specialized education background. And I say that not to be condescending or as any sort of consolation. Like, it's really cool. That's the definition of like a niche subculture. And everybody loves them. And like you don't have to look very far to see like examples of this, right? In our community, if you ever hear, you know, those old farts prattling on about crypto punks back in the day and how much better it was, but like that's what they're talking about, right? This was a group of people who they totally understood like the blockchain thing, all right, easy, and like no one else did, but like that was okay. Digital ownership, check, all right. And so within that subculture, like they just, you know, were able to develop like unique and specialized way of seeing and evaluating like what they were in front of. And they had a wicked time. And I don't know if you know how the story ends, but It turned out great for them. It was fine. It was awesome. So, and then as so often happens, right, that subculture gets vocal enough that their understanding of the medium does grow into a broader understanding of the medium, right? That's the other kind of direction that can take. So in that way, you can sort of stay in the subculture, or the subculture essentially establishes the model for understanding something that then is adopted by a broader audience. It also creates this sort of spotlight for people who maybe don't even totally understand the thing, but with subculture, people get to be around the thing. They get to be in the general proximity of the idea, even if they're not absorbing all of it. That's pretty cool. And you know what? That's I feel like at the very worst, right, the sort of generative art movement and a lot of other digital art movements have basically gotten there. They've got this kind of great self-sufficient community here. So let's move on to the final thing that you got to move through to get where you want to be, all right, or where at least I said was a good place to be at the beginning of this. And bear with me here, because this is a necessary evil, but it's not as bad as some say. Brief pause, we'll edit this out. So, all right, what else do art movements do to make themselves legible and normalized? You have to make the tech very, very, very visible before you can make it invisible. And you want to know how art movements do that? Yeah. It's modernism, baby. You may not like it, but this is what peak 20th century art performance looks like. Brief aside, I'm blatantly misusing the term modernism here. Don't at me. I'm using this term to generally refer to a broad swath of 20th century isms, which are all unique and special, but many of which I feel share some common understanding of art, some common themes, all right? And so this is where we're stuck, and this is actually also the answer to my question that leads this talk. What has Art Blocks been about thus far? The answer, I think, is that the best Art Blocks project have essentially been applications for this very specific, what I'll call a modernist method. Because just as I said, the technology has a unique challenge in containing meaning, so too does it have a unique superpower. Because actually, the greatest strength of technological art is that, yes, the technology casts a pervasive and imposing shadow over the artwork, but that shadow might be interesting. When we are sensitive to the shadow that our medium casts over our work, and when we are attuned to what it represents in a social context, then digital art sort of comes with a subject matter baked right in. Okay? So rewind a bit. Here's a low-tech precedent. Here's a Jackson Pollock. It's a painting about painting. It's a painting about painting. This is an artwork that wants to illustrate as nakedly and didactically as possible either the process of its own creation or the medium of its own creation or both. Pollock is showing us the physical process and demonstrating all of the characteristics of the physical medium. He has created a model for thinking about painting. And, he does this, and this becomes the go-to formula for making art for the next 75 years, right? This is why it becomes a unifying theme, which is why I'm going to gather a bunch of these isms into under this label, right? This becomes the one simple trick for creating a modernist masterpiece. You choose a medium is the message, you play that note really high, and then the object that you create becomes a diagram of its own creation. That's the formula, baby, okay? I saved you 4 years of undergraduate art school, all right? And now your artwork has explained something about the world. Now, probably the thing that you've explained is the thing that you yourself made, but, and now you've got this tight little tautology, but, I said that a good work of art is the distance between the things that it can be about, and a circle is certainly like a valid pattern for organizing a distance. So there you go, right? It's fine. It works. Okay, let's do another one. Let's do another one of this method, because Jackson Pollock is just like It's so famous, it's almost hard to see. Here's a real, this is real modern art, okay? So this is a piece by the sculptor Julia Dalt. And I get so on the fence about this work. I get so on the fence. I do. I know, well, here's the thing. I was like, I used to really dislike it, and then I like really liked it because I do think this is like peak modern art performance, okay? So this is what the piece is, right? You got like, you know, this like acrylic and plexiglass, and the material, right? And it's this sort of like, you know, like dichroic thing. It's just the material doing exactly what it does, demonstrating like exactly its like coefficient of like flexibility, all right, exactly like it's like color refraction, and even because the piece is made like you take these like packing straps and wrap them up, like it literally is a diagram of the potential energy that it contains. Like it literally still contains, in a very visible way, the energy that was put into creating it. The only energy that's put into creating it is still preserved inside that. It is absolutely a document of everything that went into making it. It is laid out in a perfect diagram. You can see everything about these materials. It is like peak modern art. Even the title tells you exactly when that energy was invested in the piece. I love it. You can imagine like snipping one of these cores and it would go spling, all right, and it's just like, and then it would be unmade. Like it's all so clear, it's clear as night and day. This sculpture is a model for understanding the sculpture. So I really like these sculptures unless I don't know. And that's why I love art. It's awesome. And I know that I sound like kind of glib when I talk about art this way. I know this sounds like a really analytic, like TED Talk reading of these artworks, and I know it doesn't fully do them justice. Okay? I know that a Jackson Pollock is about other things besides what I just said, but that element's definitely there. And that element, like that tautology, is like definitely like a recurring motif in modern art. For example, like if I go and see the Donald Judd artworks this weekend here in Marfa, Texas, I think we'll agree, like those wooden boxes, like they're not just about wood and demonstrating the physical and mental process of their creation. I know they're also about something sensorial, and they're trying to create a visual rhythm that is not unlike music, but they're also about what I'm saying, all right? It's a common motif, all right? But, you know, I promised you one simple trick, and if there is one, that's it. And also, like, when I reduce these things to formulae, I'm not diminishing them at all. Like, it takes nothing away from Star Wars to point out that, like, oh yeah, there's a template for a hero's journey epic. Like, it's, you know, it doesn't, knowing how something's done and being able to do it are two different things. And like, making Star Wars is still hard to do, and it still rules. So it doesn't diminish things, I'm just pointing out the formula. But I also want to say that I think that technology is a special application of this formula. And I don't think it really gets its due up until now when we're having this moment. It's a special application of this modernist model because, let's be real here, like paint doesn't matter. Like your life doesn't get in like a really practical, like, you know, kind of useful knowledge way. Your life doesn't get a lot better if you understand oil paint and how it works. Acrylic and mylar, they don't really matter. When you express the properties of those materials, you've really just made art about your own art. But technology does matter. Technology shapes our lives. So to understand technology is important. To understand technology is to understand the world around you. And so to create a model for thinking about technology is actually really important in a way that it's not important to make a model for thinking about like painting or whatever. So when I look at this, right, this is to me what that model I was just describing, like somewhat glibly, looks like in generative art. So this is Jan Robert Lechta's web, And this is like my favorite piece of like generative art that I saw in like the last 4 years. And so this is an artwork, and it's made out of like just HTML form components. And I think this is as beautiful as any of those other artworks I've shown you. And like, make no mistake, like I think that Jackson Pollock painting is beautiful, right? But it's not modeling a way of thinking about an arbitrary choice of medium. This artwork is modeling a way of thinking about something that I interact with every day for really important facets of my life. And so this artwork, like, it gives me a model for understanding, like, you know, the entire World Wide Web is essentially like a bunch of form components where the contents don't matter. They're just a bunch of like sort of like frames that lead to each other in this endless journey. And so when Jan Robert then connects all these pieces, he creates this like tiny abstracted model of like the whole World Wide Web that I think is a beautiful and profound way to understand his art medium, yes, but also something that's really important in my life. And that's to bring this, to finally start answering the question, what I think this is all about when it's at its best. So this is a model that is, it's stoic, and it's a little bit sad, you know, it's a little bit melancholy. It's also beautiful that even despite the absence of content, there's a connectivity between all of these artworks. Despite the absence of content, this thing, the World Wide Web, has a rhythm to it, a visual aesthetic, and I think it's really, really beautiful. And I think that, you know, it's that amount of self-reflectivity, it hits different when it happens in the technological sphere than it does in other art forms, when it's done well. And so that's the answer to the question for me. What was that all about? Like, what were the last 4 years about? I think that generative art defaults to that kind of modernist mental model building. Defaults. Again, there's art out there that exceeds it. There's art that goes to weird, different, unexpected directions. But that's the baseline, I think, of what is a generative art project about. Like, if you do nothing else with a generative art project, like if you just said, like, you wanted to make the cleverest algorithm that spits out the prettiest lines, like, what you would have is like a modernist art project that aestheticizes machine logic. And I do not say that as faint praise, as like I hope I illustrated, you know, over the last few minutes. I truly believe that digital art is a really powerful medium to deploy in this way because its material substrate is inherently interesting and important on a social level. And now, more than ever, how computers think is a really important thing to represent. It is important to give people tools to understand how computers think and how machine logic works. And so when I think about art blocks projects, right, like, so a squiggle, right? It's a human signature, iterated so many times through ruthless and relentless machine logic, right? That's what you're seeing, right? You are seeing an illustration of machine logic. Ringers, all right? What I always liked the best about the ringers was our artist statement, zero pretension. How many ways can you tie a string around a bunch of pegs, right? Now that's, you know, seemingly a trivial proposition until you run it 1,000 times. And then what you are really seeing is the rigor of machine logic, of algorithmic logic, right? These are all aesthetic mental models for thinking about algorithms. And so then, on top of that, another new technology came along that started to look like maybe it would be important, and that was the blockchain. And the various mechanisms of Art Blocks era generative art projects aestheticize certain blockchain mechanisms as well. And so that gives us another layer. And so that, I think, is what was achieved in the past 4 years, is I do believe that the generative art boom created a broad literacy for recognizing these kinds of systems and the ways that they can be aestheticized. And actually, one more thing that does this, and I want to point to it because it doesn't get enough credit, but actually a really important part of what happened with generative art on the internet, like on these platforms, and and I think Art Blocks really like thought about this a lot, is the curation style. So remember, when I showed all those images and I said how, the meaning came out when the images were juxtaposed and deployed like a word in a sentence that someone else constructs? And I'll always remember this, my first conversation with Snowfro, and we talked for an hour and a half, and I was really excited about art blocks, just from an art nerd perspective, because I thought it was this exciting technology and it brought so many conceptual ideas to the table. But there's one thing that he said that stuck with me, because I didn't get it. I didn't understand it at all. And he was talking about the curation style. He's like, oh yeah, we just we have to look we look at a sheet of 40 of them at a time. We have to look at a whole sheet at a time. And that was totally contradicted everything that I understood about how to look at art. I'm like, really? You don't just get really up close to one and put your nose right up to one? I was like, that doesn't make any sense. That's not how I understand we look at art. And then I realized, oh, of course it makes sense. One of these images is a bunch of colors and lines. One of these pictures is a picture of a string around pegs. But 9 of these images is a picture of an algorithm. And I don't think that I saw a lot of that before I started really consuming a lot of these generative art projects on the internet. It would be if you went into a museum, if ever they were showing a Vera Molnar, they would show one to point to oh yeah, that happened, just by the way, that happened. We recognize it happened, that's cool, right? But you actually can't infer anything about a system from one unique output of the system. It actually doesn't show you much about the algorithm at all. And I think that art blocks really normalize that. And so I think that they deserve a lot of credit, and that standardizing the idea of the 1,000-run edition, where you can see all those editions online, was actually more important than people give credit for. I think that was a really important standardization. So, in a word, anyway, after that digression, digital art is an aesthetic way of understanding a technological world, which I think is an important thing to do. So a couple minutes here just to say, that's my summary of sort of the last 4 years. And now we ask, what's next? We got there. That's how I make sense of the past 4 years, purely from the perspective of an artist and occasional art critic. Congratulations, everyone. We did it. That's a lot to be proud of. But we're not here for congratulations. We're here to ask what is next. Because as artists, we don't just want to stand still. We can't just keep explaining ourselves over and over. All right? So to answer the question, what comes next, I wanted to take a look back in history at least one really specific and tightly defined historical art movement that I think had a lot of parallels to the generative art boom. And me, being me, is kind of my thing, right? I looked at conceptualism. And specifically, I took a look through this book, all right, 6 years, The Dematerialization of the Art Object by Lucy Lepard. The actual title is all of that thing. It's fine. We just shorten it to 6 years. So this is a great document of the conceptual art movement from 1966 to 1972. And it was compiled in real time by a person who was at the center of it all, organizing many of these exhibitions that vaulted conceptualism to the forefront of the art world. And there's so many parallels between what happens at that point in history and this one. Everything happened in this really short, intense period of time. The book is called 6 years, right? And our book might be called 6 weeks in crypto is 6 years in the art world, right? And they too were building on techniques that were established in the past, but we're now finding new applications for these techniques and pushing them further. In the case of the conceptual artists, they were very aware of the fact that data artists had dematerialized art several decades ago, in the same way that I feel like the artists in this movement are very aware that they are building on computer and generative art pioneers of several decades past. And so this is as direct a first-person account of an explosive, condensed moment in art history as we can get. So I'm looking at this book because I wanted to learn, okay, so, or what did they do in the 7th year? What did they do after they all became really successful and got a lot of money? That'd be really great. The answer may shock you after this. No, the answer was, and this is true, they actually all moved to Canada. They actually did all move to Canada. Actually, that was Gary Kennedy was appointed president of NASCAD in 1972, the 6th year of these 6 years, and he brought all the conceptual artists up to teach in Nova Scotia, and they all did their best work there. So if you're not sure what to do, if you're not sure what to do this cycle, we got room for you, man. You can come. Okay, but for real, what happened to these guys? I went to the afterword, all right? I went to the afterword that she wrote as this book was about to be published. So here's the first thing. It's a good thing to note. Hopes that conceptual art would be able to avoid the general commercialization, the destructively progressive approach of modernism were for the most part unfounded. It seemed in 1969 that no one would actually pay money for this stuff. And then literally the next sentence is, 3 years later, the major conceptualists were selling their work for substantial sums. So this is all to say, don't let anyone make you feel bad about selling out, man. It's gonna happen, all right? Don't let anybody put that moral purity test on you. It happens. Okay, so that happened. We're good. Okay, but this was the thing. Okay, but like, what were they proud of? Like, what were they proud of doing? Conceptual artists set up a model that remains flexible enough to be useful today, totally aside from the pompous and flippant manner in which it has sometimes been used in the art context. So like once again, just creating a model that the art world could understand and employ in other contexts. Yes, sometimes the deployment of these models will be cringe. It's going to happen. It doesn't take away from the fact that it is an important thing to do. When you create a model for understanding a certain type of art, you create a tool that artists can put in their toolkits. And so, then, like I said, what was achieved, I think, with the broad explosion of understanding and awareness of generative art was basically a huge literacy lesson among this audience, the size of which nobody could have imagined 5 years ago, understanding, recognizing these things, all right, it becomes, all these models, they quickly become one simple trick for making generative art, boom, flow fields, all right, one simple trick, all right, but that's okay. And again, eventually some of those deployments become cringe, but you gotta deploy them. Now you have to go and apply the models, all right? And the good news is, like, you can, right? You can because you've built literacy. And you get to take it for granted that your audience understands some things that they didn't understand 4 years ago. Your audience and colleagues have that literacy to recognize a new brush in your toolkit, right? Okay, for time, all right, I love this artwork. This is my application of conceptual art, but I'm going to skip it. Okay, let's go to, all right, so what does that look like? Listen, what does it look like applying the models that came to be understood in the generative art boom? That's up to you. I'm not going to stand up here and tell any artist, okay, now you got to do this. All of my tongue-in-cheek, one simple trick bits aside. But I'll talk just briefly about how I've done it, right? And how I try to go about leveraging the advances that I think were made in the past 4 years. So this is my last major project, Boys of Summer, right? So Boys of Summer is a video game. It's a video game for a number of reasons, but one of the reasons is because, okay, I'm trying to choose technologies that are more invisible. Now that video games have been around for 40 years, I feel like it's not a big deal when somebody holds a controller in hand. Nobody's like, what is this? And there are buttons and my thumbs go on here. Nobody's freaking out about it. So the technology is invisible. So you can get to actually telling someone a story. It's a little bit wrong, but surprisingly, actually, a lot of digital art curators actually still don't understand. It's still surprised by video games, but that's okay. It's another thing. But anyway, yeah, just like in the cloud sculpture, I'm going to hide all the algorithm stuff. I hide as much of the blockchain stuff as I can, and I just try to use my knowledge of that to tell a story. And I'm going to trust that everybody who needs to find the generative art, like the aestheticization of algorithms, will be able to find it. I trust that everybody who needs to see the blockchain mechanics here will find it. Because I can trust in that now, right? Like, because people are smarter, right? People are smarter than they were 4 years ago, right? Yeah, for sure. They are. But that's what you get to do. And make no mistake, all that other stuff is in here, right? So look at this. Remember I said I was a big Jan Robert Lechta appreciateur, all right? Because I feel he's laying these things out, and he's showing that there's this structural he's showing the structural scaffolding that actually all this data sits on, where the content doesn't matter. Now, you don't think I'm just gonna stand up here and appreciate another artist and not try to rip him off, do you? No, sir. I am a professional artist, baby. Ripping off other people is what I do, right? So I'm counting on the fact that what other artists this have been doing for the past however many years is a visual language that I can just tap into, and people will see it. That I'm just trying to use all that work other people did as just another little brush in my toolkit, all right? And I'm counting that people can see that there's some of this and that. Now, is it a direct, obviously don't expect everybody to be like, oh, what a droll reference to Jan Robert Lechta. That would be obnoxious. I just mean that there's a general vibe that is communicated. There's general understanding in showing the scaffolding of data and the emptiness of the content, right? So yeah, I'm just gonna let what other artists do be one simple trick, and I'm gonna deploy it along all the other tricks that I ripped off from all the rest of you. And maybe 2 or 3 tricks that I invented myself. Okay, one trick I invented myself. All right, I'm depending on people understanding that the thing on the left has a lot in common with the thing on the right, just run through a video game engine. All right, this is not it's not. And what's cool about it is that it's not revolutionary. All right, this is just a technique that actually brings some symbolic weight with it when you use it, when you deploy it in the right way. And now you can, right? You just can. There's a literacy about it. And so, like I said, I'm not going to stand up here and tell artists what to do. I'm just kind of showing you where I've been going with it. And for all collectors and critics here, I'll just say with absolute certainty that all the art that you saw over the past 4 years or whatever, you're going to see it again and again. But ideally, if artists are doing their job right, you're going to see it again, but hidden. You're going to see it again, but mutated. You're going to see it adapted into other media and genres and formats that we haven't gained an expertise on, that we need to understand now, in the year 2025. And finding them is going to be delightful and surprising in all the best ways. And you will travel in your mind across great distances of meaning. And that might mean finding the generative systems that are really deliberately at the core of, video games or rugs or physical sculptures or whatever it's going to be. I don't know. In all cases, this is based on a real trust that audiences in our subculture will be able to identify those systems and bring the symbolic value of those systems into their understanding of all of the different aspects of that artwork. And we do this in the service of telling stories to those outside of our subculture. And finally, one bit of optimism that I truly have for the people in this community, the artists in this community. I wanted to look at, a negative sentiment, a negative reflection on a period of on a big art boom, right? And this was also from the afterword of the book that I presented before. And it's a lamentation that conceptual art has not, however, as yet broken down the real barriers between the art context and those external disciplines, social, scientific, and academic, from which it draws its sustenance. I think that people who were creating conceptualism in the late 60s and early 70s, they really believed that the models they were creating would have some application, just outside the art world, that people would use it for more than the kind of stuff that I was just saying, having another paintbrush in your toolkit or whatever. Like they wanted to see these models applied in the real world. And I do see a lot of potential, right, in the community and in the participants in this art movement that we have built here together. Because while Lepard was disappointed that the conceptualist movement stayed largely inside the art world, one of the biggest advantages in this community and in our art movement is that it was initiated largely by people who were outside the discipline of art. A lot of the people here were scientists or technologists or entrepreneurs before they were artists or art aficionados. And like, make no mistake, that posed some challenges in some ways and caused some friction at a lot of points. But it's also meant that the ideas and values that we've seen in here are already starting to bleed out into different disciplines. I recognize this, and I have put together this presentation with the explicit aim of creating one of many possible, hopefully concise drafts of what those ideas and values are. Art is a model for us. It's a way of understanding, but it can be a way of understanding anything. Most of the people here will continue to exist in multiple worlds. In the art world and the science world, or in the art world and the business world. It's the biggest advantage of this art movement. And as we go out into the world, remember, like, you don't have to use art as a Trojan horse to onboard the next billion users onto crypto, like, despite what people tell you. And you don't have to use generative art to lure wealthy tech people into the art market, despite what all of the people in the auction houses keep telling you. You're just here to create a model of understanding. Your job as an artist is just to believe in something, anything, and put that in a package that can connect with other human beings. Your job is to give them a model that they can use to travel through your belief.